Hello, this is Jimbo from the YouTube channel Jimbo, South Dakota, and this is the Hog House Chronicles podcast. And yesterday I had a nice surprise. My first cousin, Tim Myers, and his wife, Delynn, are going from North Dakota down to Texas for the winter. So they came through. He has the same birthday as my mom. Special bond there. They always call back and forth, so he's going to make sure that he stopped and saw the family. So we got the call yesterday and went down for supper, 45 minutes from here. And he agreed to drive up to my place, so we're in the basement here, and we're going to film a podcast. So you'll hear the story, but he's retired military.
Not retired military. I did 15.
Oh, 15. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And see, that's why we're here. We're going to get the story. And Bureau of Criminal Investigation in North Dakota. So that was probably the majority of your working career?
Yeah, I did 15 years in the Air Force, security police. And, when I went in, I was really trying to get into law enforcement. And in the Air Force, they had two security or law enforcement type career fields. So I was hoping to get the law enforcement type career field, but I got the security one. But they all pretty much equal when it came to when I got out and was able to go to the academy in North Dakota and those kind of things. So it was still good. It was still good to have that on your resume and stuff. So
yeah. Okay.
So basically, when I was younger, one of the reasons I liked the law enforcement or was interested in law enforcement was we had a neighbor that was very good friends with my folks, and he was a police officer in Billings, Montana. So when I was younger, he used to beg me to not come over to his house because he lived a couple doors down. And but he always listened to me and would tell me stories about his police experiences and things like that. So that was always where this all started. And then to me, a biggest part of my life is my family, but my younger life obviously was a little more rough than a person would really want it to be. But, I moved on, and when I graduated from high school, I joined the Air Force trying to get into the law enforcement side, but I got into the security instead. But, all in all, we ended up traveling the world a little bit, and we got two beautiful daughters, and we're coming up on our 47th wedding anniversary and stuff.
Nice.
So, yeah. I don't know how she did it, putting up with me that long.
I think most of us say that about our spouses. How did they deal with us? And thankfully still dealing.
Yes, for sure. But no, that was kind of the way we went. And we were stationed in Cheyenne, Wyoming first. And so then shortly after that, about 3.5 years after that, I re-enlisted and we went over to Athens, Greece, and spent 2.5 years there, and then that's where our youngest daughter was born. So she's kind of proud of the fact that she was born in Athens, Greece. So
that's cool.
Yeah. But shortly after that, we came back, and we had an opportunity to come to Grand Forks, and we're from Billings, but I've lived in North Dakota more of my life than I have anywhere else. So we chose that a little bit closer to Billings and that kind of thing. Plus, we still had friends in North Dakota and stuff like that. So it was all good. Worked different security jobs, missile sites, aircraft security, weapons security, all that kind of stuff. So, got some diversity as far as what kind of jobs we did and those kind of things. So got to see a lot, some TDYs, and, got to go to Japan and Portugal and the Azores and Egypt. And, so I think Delynn figured it out one time and took string on a globe and kind of, put some stick pins in there and ran string for everywhere. And I think we've been around the world about 4 times.
Wow.
But you probably have been around the world a lot more than that.
Not necessarily.
No?
It's been a lot of different trips. But then being in the Guard full time, after 2.5 years in the Air Force, I traveled once to England in the Air Force, and then the rest was Air Guard. But most of when I went somewhere, it was like, say, 90 days, right in there. So
Sure.
As far as distances and number of trips, maybe fairly equal, but the amount of time, not as, because you traveled most of the time with your family, or did you have to do some remotes?
I did a remote in Iceland, but Dylan and the kids stayed in North Dakota, just outside of the base in Grand Forks. And that was actually the only remote that I had to do. I did some TDYs, were usually 30, maybe 60 days. But other than that, we were together all the time pretty much, which I'm grateful for. That's when you're away from your family, whether you're in the military or if you're working shift work or whatever, it's amazing how many things you miss,
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes you actually forget that your family is probably the most important thing that you need to watch over and make sure that they're taken care of and all that kind of thing. And also things, your friends, your friends, the people you meet in the military. I'm lucky enough that I've stayed in contact with probably, a dozen or more of different guys that I was stationed with, and their families and our family were good friends and still stay in touch. We see them every once in a while, not as often as you'd like, but, it's part of your life. It's part of your experience in the military. It's not always just what you did, but it's the people that you were with and the time that you enjoyed and all that kind of thing. So we're grateful for those 15 years. It wasn't always perfect, but you know what? It was a big part of the deal when I got out of the service, and I had an opportunity actually while I was still in the military. I had a sheriff, a good friend of ours from Hillsboro, and he made arrangements for me to go to the police academy in Bismarck while I was still in the military. Oh. And I had a first sergeant that was a great guy, and he, got my commander to sign off on it and all that kind of stuff. So that was you don't hear about that stuff very often.
How many years before you got out did that happen?
About a year, last year.
So they knew it was last year, and you were prepping for civilian life.
The first sergeant did. I don't think the commander knew.
Yeah,
but
they don't need to know everything.
Well, and they don't. Well, I don't want to say they don't care, but they there's more fish in the sea than Tim Myers. So
yeah, I definitely know what you're saying. Commander's got a lot going on. Everybody's got a lot going on, but they have more.
And actually, my first sergeant made me go in and tell the commander that I was getting out. I wasn't re-enlisted, and that was not a pretty thing.
Was that 3 months prior or so?
Yeah, about that. Maybe a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, well, this isn't right that you're doing this. And I'm like, well, I'm tired of the rigmarole and all the things that have gone with it. And I've already got a career lined up outside. So
what do you think he was thinking with his definition of this ain't right? What was he basing that on, do you think? Just as a guess.
That people don't, or some of the troops don't spend 15 years in the military and then just all of a sudden say that's enough.
Yeah.
And he's probably right to an extent, but it comes to a point in your life where you got to figure out, okay, do I want to put up with this for another 5 years just for retirement?
Right.
The timing of it was actually very good for me, because I was allowed to graduate from the academy. And I was out of the service. We were still living in Hatton, and we were out for about May, June, July, about 3.5 months. And I literally, in that 3.5 months, had about 2 days off because I took a shift everywhere I could so that we could keep the bills paid and keep those guys off your back,
Now, I might have missed it with the academy. What specifically was that training or the title of the academy?
Well, it's the North Dakota Highway Patrol Academy.
Highway Patrol, okay.
Yeah, but they they run the academy for all the law enforcement people in North Dakota.
Oh, okay.
So, like I said, I was just lucky enough to be able to get in and that kind of thing. And then once I got out, I applied several places and got hired at Manda MPD in 1991. And so we moved out to Mandan, and I had already lived there in Bismarck, in the Bismarck-Mandan area. I'd lived there before. So we kind of knew the area, and we had friends there still. So that always helps, you know. And, you know, it was kind of a tough time for a little bit, you know, financially and stuff, but the kids went to school there, graduated from school there, and all that kind of thing. So I worked for the police department for a little less than 6 years, and I worked patrol for 2 or 3 years, and then I went into investigations. I was a little older than some of the guys that were there. I did a lot of public service announcements and things like that, because some of the guys like, well, that's not real police work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I did some of those things because the chief would ask for volunteers and nobody'd want to do it. So I did that. And then, like I said, when I went into investigations, I was doing that. And, an opening came along with the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, and it was in Wahpeton at that time. And it was, they needed somebody to run a task force there, a drug task force. So I applied, and it was about, it's probably from August to the end of the year. And then I was notified that I got the position. So we had to pack up and move from Bismarck to Mandan to Wahpeton.
Sure. A couple questions for you.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to the military portion. You have the 12 friends that you're still in touch with, which is amazing. A lot of people don't do that. Were they all in your career field, or were some of them a mix of different career fields whose families would take care of each other when the others are gone?
Everybody, we were all in security police career field. Sometimes we would travel together to TDYs and those kind of things, and the families would help each other and things like that. Matter of fact, on this trip, we're going to stop in Manitou, Oklahoma, and we have a good friend couple that we were stationed with and lived in Hatton, neighbors, and they came and saw us this summer while we were working up at Fort Stevenson State Park. And so we're going to kind of work our way down to see them for a couple of days. So, and it was a really pleasant surprise when they reached out and that kind of thing. So,
well, even with family stuff, you guys have been really good with staying in touch and really promoting our every 3-year family reunions. And most of us that stay close with family stay close with friends as well, because it's built within us. Because I've often said life's about relationships, and you need to keep hold of that.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier today about life is just too short. I mean, I'm going to be 66 and you're 60, and your mom and I have that bond. We have the same birth date, and your sister has the same birth date as my dad.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So, there's things like that. And, we have a large family. They're all over the place, but we do try and stay in touch with everybody. And I'm not a big fan of the internet and some of the things that are out there, but it has really helped us all stay in touch through the internet of what you got going on, what I've got going on, retirement, the traveling thing and things like that. So it's all good. I mean, it's those are things that everybody needs to do. And the more you do them, I think the more gratification you get out of it too,
Right.
We were talking yesterday, this trip, we're going to Texas and stuff. And it's the first or maybe the second time in our whole married life where we decided to go somewhere, but we didn't have a schedule. We don't have to be in Sioux City by 3:00 today. We don't have to worry about that. We're just going when we get to, or we can see where our next stop is going to be, that's what we make plans for. And it's actually kind of trying because we're used to being planners,
Right.
But
Right. So, did you have any trips in the military where something happened you'd like to let us know about, or is it a pretty basic career, go to work, do your job, the solid citizen type?
that's basically what my career was. I was always ahead of the game when it came promotions and things like that. So I was always proud of that, and those kind of things. As far as things that happened while I was in the military, there's the things, the bomber that blew up on it burned on the runway up in Grand Forks and stuff. I wasn't working that day, but we lived just a little short distance from there, so you could see the smoke and all that. And tragically, one of the young mechanics there was killed in that.
Oh,
and,
that's too bad.
yeah, and things like that. And maybe kind of a funny, when we were going to Egypt, we flew over. We left here in a 141 and landed in the Azores, which the runway is the beginning and the end are on one peninsula. So you better have the brakes working good when you're landing there.
A couple times.
Yeah. And so we ended up going over to Egypt and doing some things over there. One of the things that happened when I was in Egypt was we're watching, and they're doing, I don't know what you call them anymore, practice for different things and stuff, and they were launching the B-52s. Well, they had, B-52s have such a huge wingspan, and the runways over there were not huge. So it was like landing a B-52 on a 2-lane highway in South Dakota.
Right.
And so one day a buddy of mine, we were eating a MRE off the manifolds of our truck because it was the only way to cook anything. And we look up, and here we can hear this B-52 running down the runway. And all of a sudden, I don't know if it was a gust of wind or whatever, but it tipped down into the sand. We're in a desert.
Wow.
And they got that little wheel out on the end.
Yep.
Well, it dug down in the sand, and I thought, oh my God, we're going to have a crashed bomber, But it turned out the pilot must have just hit everything he had, and he pulled that wheel out of the sand, and they took off. And I was like, oh my goodness, because that would have been a mess,
Oh, huge.
Yeah, but that was kind of funny. The next part of the funny trip was on our way back. We stopped at the Azores, fueled up, getting ready to fly back to the U.S. And you know how the jump seats are. I mean, they're all jump seats along the sides. And I'm sitting by one of the porthole windows there, and we take off. We've been up 5-10 minutes, I suppose. The pilot comes over and says, we're having some difficulties, but we're going to see if we can't fix them so we can keep going. And one of the crew chiefs for the 141 comes up and he has me move. So I get up and I move away, and he opens a panel on there. You know how they got the little twist levers and stuff, and he opens the panel, and he's looking down there with a flashlight, and there's a gauge down there. And I'm like, okay, Well, he leaves, and he comes back with a quart of hydraulic fluid, and the old type spout,
Right.
And he reaches in there and pours in that can of hydraulic fluid, and he goes, He looks at the gauge again. He leaves and comes back with a case of oil. I started putting the filler into that. So he must have put 4, 5, 6 quarts of that stuff in there.
Wow.
And then the next thing we know, the pilot's saying, yeah, we got to turn around and go back. So we turn around and go back. And normally for us, if there was an in-flight emergency, we were on the guys on the ground. We were the security forces on the ground.
Right.
And, well, this time we're in the plane. So they declared a in-flight emergency and all that kind of stuff and said, yeah, we're going to be turning around. And we had no idea what the problem was. You know, all we knew is that this kid was trying to.
So he didn't tell you what system he was feeding?
No.
You didn't ask what system he was feeding?
In the end, we did.
Did you?
Yeah.
I thought maybe you didn't want to know.
Well, I didn't want to know at the time. But when we when we landed, he landed, in the ends of the runway, there's stripes in one end and stripes in the other. Well, we touched down in the stripes on the one end, and when we got off of the airplane on the other end, we were standing in the stripes and the front wheel was off the end of the runway. I looked at him and I said, what was this all about? And he goes, well, we had a couple of O-rings that were bad and and he said he said as fast as I was putting it in there, it was just pumping it right out. And I'm going like, oh my God. I said, why didn't you tell us? He said, you think I'm crazy? I don't want a bunch of crazy cops, being upset because the plane's broke, But anyway, we stayed there a couple days and they fixed the plane and then we made it home. But
wow,
it just, you're going like, oh, it was the landing gear. He ended up pinning the landing gear by hand, and the T tail on the 141 that ran part of that. So it was. Afterwards, we were all looking at each other like, I don't know if I want to get back on that airplane.
Really?
Yeah,
that's true.
Exactly. But no, I had a lot of good experiences and stuff. Met a lot of wonderful people,
mm-hmm.
and you kind of share your life with them, even though it might be for a short period of time, depending on where you're stationed and what you're doing. But I don't have any issues with my military time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I did what I did when I got out. I had an opportunity to move on into law enforcement, which was really where I wanted to be.
Yeah, so you spent 15 years not with your first love, but you learned a bunch of stuff in security,
right?
Which moved into the law enforcement portion,
right? And when we went to the academy and graduated from the academy and stuff, a lot of the things we learned, even though it was the security side, they used a lot of that as your experience. So it was still good.
Mm-hmm.
But
so it sounds like, well, we usually ask people, or maybe they volunteer information of, did they have much trouble, changing into civilian life? Now with combat veterans and Marines that have really done high test stuff, it's more of a deal. Sounds like you were pretty prepared to move into the next stage, even having the academy before you left. So was it a pretty smooth transition? Now, you mentioned the money, budget and stuff.
Yeah.
But overall, was it a fairly smooth transition, or was there some struggles there?
Well, there were some struggles, but some of the struggles were the fact that I was in my early 30s, and a lot of the other guys that were working there were in their early to mid 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot more life experience, and obviously when you're in the military and they tell you to trim the grass with your sewing kit scissors when you're in basic training, these guys would look at that and they'd say, I ain't doing that,
Right.
And so there was a lot of things that I saw in their response to doing their job. And for me, it's just like if somebody gave you a call that was not the most favorable call and something that you really didn't want to do, you just went and did it. Because if you went and did it, it was done in 15 minutes. But some of the younger guys would complain about it for a half an hour, then finally go do it. And if they would have just done it right away, it would have been different. So I was grateful for that, But as far as the transition, it was good. I mean, when we decided to do it, it was like, let's go get this done. And when I had the opportunity, we took it. We didn't wait around for something that was maybe more money or whatever,
Right. It's a solid decision to get out. and a solid decision to move on. So
Yeah,
sounds like it went
absolutely.
pretty well.
Yeah, it did. It did. And we're not sorry. I mean, you can ask DeLynn. She wasn't sorry that we did it. And actually, it was better for me because I was stressed, because of all the things that they had going on and all that kind of stuff. So it worked out pretty darn well.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you move on from patrol for a few years, then you work investigations for a few years at a smaller department, and then you get an opportunity to go work at the State Crime Bureau. And you look, and I ran a drug task force for 12 years. It wasn't the worst thing that I ever did, but it wasn't the most fun thing either. There were some things that were pretty serious and things that I enjoyed. But on the same token, it's like, if you could get away from some of that, yeah, you would. But, you can look back and I don't want to bust ahead too much, but, being there for 12 years, well, 2 of those years I was assigned to the DEA task force in Fargo. And it was a drug task force where different agencies would volunteer a man or two to this task force, and then you would all work together on federal cases.
Is that because they had different skills, or was it just sharing the workload, labor?
I think it was sharing the workload, but we also had different things that we were working on that if you sit down with 6 or 7 of these guys and he says, well, I know this guy, and I go, oh, I know this guy. He's in one of my cases too. So you network and you get all that stuff going. And then in the end, you look like, holy cow, because we literally had that happen. When I first went up there, we had a big sit down and everybody was sharing. And said, one guy says, well, what about this guy's name? Do you know this name? Yeah, I know that name. We got dope off him. And then he goes, really? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, well, we did that and we did this and we did this. So when you put it all together, it ended up to be that one case. It's one federal case, but to me, it was huge. And to everybody that worked it was huge. I don't know if I talked to you about this before we came down, but just recently, after I retired from BCI and I went to work at the federal courthouse for court security there and stuff after that, just this last, what was it, February or so, I got a call from a federal prosecutor who had worked this big case with us. And he said, are you free on this day? And I said, sure. And he said that for that case, we had 66 federal defendants, some of which came out of Mexico, cartels, and they were bringing the drugs up the West Coast and across to us and across to Chicago and Minneapolis. And I'd been away from there for quite a few years, but I didn't realize that case was still open. Mm. They had one defendant left. All the other 65 had come in, pled guilty, and were sentenced and in prison. The one defendant was a number 2 or 3 guy in the Mexican cartel, or one of the cartels.
Right.
They finally, it took them 11 years, but they finally, in 11 years, got this guy extradited back to the United States. And what was happening was he finally pled guilty, or was getting ready to plead guilty and change what we call a change of plea. So they had called everybody that worked on the case, which I think all of us were retired. And and the prosecutor calls us and says, hey guys, let's get together and let's be there when this guy changes his plea. And they took us out for a nice lunch, and we all talked about how it started and how it was ending now and all that kind of stuff. But some people don't realize that there's cases out there like that. They seem like they take forever, and sometimes they do. But the end result justifies the means. I mean, it took us a long, long time to get that 66th guy, but there was 65 in between that we got a hold of and got everything taken care of.
Well, it's refreshing to hear that it just really did follow through that far instead of, saying, well, we're overwhelmed with all this other stuff. I guess we went far enough on this case. It's very refreshing to hear that it was finished up to 66.
Well, and really, I got to see a partner of mine, which him and I actually started that case, brought it, shared it with others, and they shared their stuff. And I mean, it just grew and grew and grew and grew. And my gosh, it was just unbelievable. And when we all sat down and started sharing names again, do you remember this person? Do you remember that person? Well, they did this. And then I had left the DEA task force and went back to my task force in Wahpeton and stuff. So I kind of lost touch. But as time went on, I ran into that prosecutor because he was on the federal side and I was working in the federal courthouse. So, as time goes on, you get to that. But like I said, it takes a long time sometimes. Just the process itself of extraditing someone from another country back into the United States for prosecution takes a long, long time.
So with extraditing him, was he deciding he was going to change his plea before the extradition, or was that after?
It was after.
Okay, so he wasn't like incarcerated down there and you just moved him up here and you all knew it was going to happen. You got him up here first.
Yeah.
And then figured out what was going to happen.
Yeah, and once he knows what he's charged with and, and he's life in prison. He got life in prison. They brought up a lot of drugs. Mm-hmm. And so it was, you called it refreshing to hear that we went through to the end. But for us, it was kind of reassuring that everything we did was not for naught. I don't know how to say that.
It wasn't for nothing.
Yeah.
It all mattered.
It didn't even go away.
Yeah.
And the guy that was the federal prosecutor, I had run into him several times, and he said, that case is still open. And I'm like, really? And I kind of thought that, it had been closed out or whatever. But when I got the call from him that day, it was just amazing. And it kind of pumps you up a little bit like, yeah, we finally got this guy.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
How could it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you didn't care, then there's something wrong with you, I think.
Yeah, you're in the wrong career field too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, just being I shouldn't say just, but being a policeman or anything in law enforcement is so difficult. I mean, it's all in the news now and stuff too, the more difficulties and all that. But was there much of that type of hate or whatever back in those days that you guys had to put up with?
Not so much. There was some. There's always some, but it comes from people that it doesn't matter if you hear it from them. Because they're the bad guys. They're the ones you're trying to get them off the street from selling dope or stealing cars or whatever,
It's like on a different subject this morning. We were like, look at his face. Does this face look like I care what you think about me?
Yes, exactly.
Take a guess.
Yeah.
It was the same thing.
Yeah. And it's I've been called every name in the book, but it's like, again, like you said, I don't care. You can call me whatever you want. Don't call me late for supper,
Oh, there you go. It's a little slow.
But no, it's I wish I would have went longer in some aspects, but I was getting older, and the older you get, chasing tailpipes isn't any fun. And the older you get doing, chasing drug dealers and stuff, that gets old after a while too. So I kind of left the drug side, and we moved back to Bismarck because there was an opening for an agent there. Our kids were there and our grandkids and stuff. So it was kind of a good move for us to leave Wahpeton and go back to Bismarck. And then I was just doing, what we call stand-up cases, just general cases. But it change day to day. You know, every day you might get called to a homicide. One might be a sexual assault. One might be a child molester. You know, you got a little bit of everything all the way through. And, you know, sometimes you run into the big one a little bit sometimes, and not everybody does that. And, you know, something that I didn't say much about too, Jim, is when you have a big case like that or a case of that magnitude, it's not just one guy.
Yeah,
you know, people
definitely.
say, I am grateful for every investigator, every patrolman, every deputy, every federal officer that I ever worked with on anything. Because the bottom line is that if we don't work together, nothing gets done. Because if I take my case and say, I'm just going to work on this by myself, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to share this, ain't going to happen. No success, or virtually no success. Or you might get one or two little people instead of 66 big people.
Right.
So, you know, I look back, and a lot of the guys that I worked with when I was on the DEA task force, and the guys that worked for me and with me on the task force in Wahpeton, you know, you have to be grateful for all those guys, because you go to war, so to speak, with each of them side by side with you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't trust them and they don't trust you, again, you're going to fail. You're setting yourself up for failure. So, you know, a lot of people just think, well, you know, Tim Myers has this name on this case. Well, yeah, but Tim Myers might have been the lead investigator on that, but Tim Myers also had 8 other guys who were doing parts of that case, collecting evidence, processing evidence, you know, going door to door, interviewing people in the neighborhood.
It's got to be a team effort.
It has to be.
It's too big.
Well,
but somebody has to rein it in and keep the control and continuity, I should say.
Well, and keep everybody on task.
Yep.
You know, and those are all things that matter. And you know, I wish I could sit here with you and I could run down a list. I could just start, okay, this guy, this guy, this guy, you know. And then you get to, like I said, the guys that were on that federal task force. I got to see them last month or two, and I hadn't seen them I had retired the end of September of 2014. So we're looking at almost 10 years that I've been retired. And that case was 3 or 4 or 5 years before that. And a lot of these guys, I hadn't seen them. Some of them are federal agents, so they work and they go different directions and stuff. And then some of our state guys are retired as well. So, you know, we mentioned it earlier, talking about family, friends, people you work with, taking care of them taking care of you, and always appreciating them and remembering them. If they need your help, you go help them. You know, those kind of things. And I look back at my many years there, and not as many as some, but you look at them and you go, man, am I glad that guy was there. You know, had a couple of bank robberies. I didn't have a lot of bank robberies. I was doing dope work, you know. Well, then we have a bank robbery in Wahpeton, and I'm like going, where do I start with this?
It's like you don't even really hear of that anymore. You think of the old Westerns, you know, they robbed the bank, you know, they're
yeah, absolutely.
You know. Oop. Yep, there I had a sound effect for that.
But
so with the drug part, it's statewide investigations. Did you find that there was just as big of a problem in small town, Northeast, Northwest, North Dakota, or was it more centralized in the bigger towns, or how'd that go?
When I first went to the task force in Wahpeton, there was only 3 of us. I take it back, it's 4 of us. Me and 3 other guys that worked for the police department or the sheriff's department, whatever. And when I first started there, if we got an 1/8 ounce of weed, marijuana, or a gram of cocaine or whatever, we thought we hit the jackpot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One of the deals that I was lucky enough to have an informant who helped us, and it was a big, big case for me, was 100 pounds of marijuana and 3 pounds of meth that were not cut. So they were in bricks.
Mm-hmm.
So the packages of meth were about this square and cubed like the size of a brick, maybe even a little bit bigger. And this informant goes in, we're listening to him, and he comes out, and I said, well, did you get some dope? Yeah. Where is it? It's in the back seat. So I go look in the back seat of his car, and there's a Ziploc bag with a chunk of meth that I've never seen before in my life.
Wow.
Most of the meth that we had was powdered. It was ground up and things, and I was like almost stunned because I didn't expect that to happen. So we went from a gram of cocaine or an eighth of gosh darn it.
That's all right. You're a high-tech guy. I don't have that watch stuff. My phone's over there with yours.
Oh my gosh. I can't turn it off from here. Anyway, can we just ignore that, or should I go shut it off? I'm going to go shut it off.
Yeah. I can edit that out.
Can you? Okay, cool.
Not the initial part. We'll let you get embarrassed, but then we'll... No, I'll use a sound effect because we edited out a little portion there, but your watch had your phone over there, but
Busted.
There you go.
Oh my gosh. And here I thought I had everything turned off. Oh,
That's
well.
right.
But where were we talking? We were talking about...
With the small amount of drugs, but then getting to the big amount and also
Right.
the brick.
Right. And we're doing this. So I had 100 pounds of weed in coolers, bricks of weed and the bricks of meth. And I was looking at my supervisor. I'm like, oh my God. Because when it came out, I had that. They gave it to him.
Mm-hmm.
They trusted this guy so much. They gave it to him. So then we're like, okay, we already have paperwork for a search warrant. So we go in and do the search warrant. We come up with 2 more packages of the meth and the 100 pounds of weed. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'd never seen that much drugs before.
Mm-hmm.
If we got a pound of something or whatever, I'd never seen any of that before. After I retired or got away from the drug task force and that kind of stuff and went to Bismarck to do regular investigations, some of the young guys were going out and they were bringing in truckloads of marijuana and bigger poundage of meth and all these kind of stuff. And they're laughing at me because I think that my case is the best thing that ever happened to me,
Mm-hmm.
But it grew and grew and grew and grew. And then the meth lab thing, that was huge too. They used to give us equipment. We had to go to Washington and get Washington, D.C. and get training on how to dismantle meth labs and things. I hated that. Oh, I hated that. And most all the guys did because it was so scary and it was so volatile. And when I got away from that, I was never so happy in my life because you just don't know what you're going into. And, and I'm sure you've heard it in the news and stuff down in South Dakota, same situations as we had in North Dakota a lot. Some of these guys who were making meth were going out into small farm communities and stuff, and they would find an abandoned farmstead and they would set things up and start cooking and all that kind of thing. And it was like, what do you do? And that just went on and on and on. Then they finally realized that, okay, well, the cops are looking at us too much for cooking, so why don't we go ahead and just get it out of Mexico? So then that increased, the amounts kept going up and up and up. So, you know, it was amazing. It was a really good experience. You got to see things that the general public doesn't see. But when it came down to it, I was glad that we didn't, that we didn't have to do that, or I didn't have to work in that capacity. Doesn't mean that I didn't help with some other cases, but when they need people, they take people from wherever they can get them. So to work that case or do a search warrant or whatever. So, but again, that falls into the thing of everybody helps everybody. If I need help on working on a homicide, then we bring people in and we work it until it's done and go from there. Same with drug work,
Mm-hmm.
So, as time went on, I mean, there's just so many things out there that people just don't realize. And the part of this, what we're talking about is there was a lot of agents out there that worked a lot more big cases than I ever did. And I had a few, but some of them, there was in Valley City that one year, I want to say there was like 6 or 8 homicides in Valley City, North Dakota, which isn't a very big town. And I had, over my career, maybe 3,
Mm-hmm.
But
Like
I
you're
helped.
watching a Longmire episode or two in middle of Wyoming, one county, all these homicides.
Yeah.
But it's can be the truth from what
Well,
you're
it
saying.
can. And one of the things that bothers me about the way law enforcement is today, and not the law enforcement part, but the way people feel about law enforcement, is when you have all of the political pull and the political things that are happening and the anti-law enforcement this, they always want to talk about the negative. They never want to talk about what these guys did that was good.
Mm-hmm.
So you hear all of that. And you just want to reach out and grab somebody and what did we call it earlier? We want to punch you in the throat.
Yeah. It sounds so much more dramatic than punch you in the nose, right in the throat.
Yeah. But in the thing in Fargo, I'm sure you guys heard about the shooting in Fargo here not too long ago, where the guy, Middle Eastern guy, he's a U.S. citizen, and he sits back, and while the police officers are taking care of a traffic stop, he just starts nailing them, shooting them down.
Jeez.
And it's like, what the heck? What causes somebody to want to do that kind of stuff? But if there was a good thing about that, is it really ramped up the support for the blue,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that was very good. It was very sad. The one officer that was killed had only been on the job 3 months.
Oh, really?
Young guy, 21, 22 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at that and you're going like, holy cow, and it could have been way worse. The story is, I don't know how accurate this is, but the things that we've heard is that this guy was on his way downtown to a street fair down in Fargo. Can you imagine, Jim, had he gotten to that street fair and, on TV they showed all the guns he had, the ammunition, he had some propane bottles full of who knows what and all that kind of stuff. So you got to look at all that stuff and people that say, well, we don't like the cops, we aren't supporting the cops and stuff. I'd say no problem. let's put a sign outside. I don't support law enforcement, but don't call us if you need us. That's the way I feel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's been some of that going on in, like Minneapolis and
Oh yeah.
different areas.
But, it's I don't know. It's it really bothers you. It bothers me sometimes to see that. And when that young guy was killed, it's like, hey, I had a case where a police sergeant in Bismarck got killed. Guy I knew, I get a call at 10:30 at night from my boss and says, "Hey, we lost an officer." And I'm like, "What?" And he says, "Yeah, this guy had been killed, in the line of duty, and he was responding to a domestic violence call." And I said, "Who is it?" And he told me, and I'm like, "Oh my God," because I'd known this guy for 20 years. We weren't close friends or anything, but we worked cases together. We went to training together, all that kind of stuff. So here you are going to do a investigation about a guy that you know. It takes away
Mm-hmm.
it makes it a little more impersonal if I don't know that person.
Right.
You still are going to do your job. But man, it really fires you up when it's somebody you know. It does. It fires you up 100%.
Right.
And you get to a point where it's like, geez, why is this all happening? Why is this happening? And then you find out because you do the investigation and you talk to the people who are there. And then again, you have to call in some people to help you because you can't do it all yourself. And then you find out, these two agents from Valley City and Jamestown, they drive from there down and they start knocking on doors and interviewing people and stuff. So I don't know exactly what all they're getting, but you need those people. You need those conversations. You need to share all that information, and it helps you take care of that. So you're prosecuting the guy who's been charged or whatever. It was very difficult to go to the hospital and try to interview the guy who shot and killed someone you know.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine what that would be like.
Well, it's
Having to stay objective and calm and
right. Yeah. And there's times when you don't want to. You don't want to very badly. But it's it's part of the deal. That's what you're paid to do. And when it comes down to it, you do it. The guy pled guilty. It was his defense was that there maybe was someone else in the van where this all took place. And we're like, we had 3 cops around that van. Nobody came out of that van. You were the only one in that van. How do you say that there was somebody else? No, there wasn't. There wasn't
Right.
anybody else.
Yep.
And that kind of thing. So I don't know. I'm glad that I'm not doing that kind of work anymore. I've had a couple other cases that were pretty huge that I felt were pretty big. But you just never get over what you see and what's there. And again, you're always grateful for all the people who help you and those kind of things too. So it's like when you get to retirement time, then you're like, oh, let's wind down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Right. So on the subject of the police through your career, were you guys exposed to a lot of I'm just tired of the word hate, but just the positives and the negatives, a lot of negative against the police forces and the BCI and all that in your area?
Not really. I think it was for the time that I was in law enforcement and worked for the Crime Bureau, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't any like there is now, or what we see now. You always had a few of those people who were anti-law enforcement, anti-government, whatever. But most of the time, you had more people on your side than the negative. Mm-hmm. So, and that was always okay. But the amount of good that you were given was way less than the amount of grief that you heard about.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that kind of goes along with what you're saying earlier. A lot of times just the human nature, people just want to talk about the negative more than acknowledge the positive or talk about, right. Even if they did acknowledge it in their head.
Well, just watch the national news. Every night you watch the national news and they talk about all the negative stuff. And then the last 3 minutes, they put a soft soft thing so you can, oh, isn't that sweet?
Some kind of feel good.
Yeah.
And not every night either.
Well, the ones I watch, they always throw that little nice thing in the bottom. But yeah, it gets old after a while, and that's, in our retirement, we're just wanting to kind of get away from all that stuff and
right.
all that. We have lots of good memories, lots of cases that I worked on that were, that I was proud of and, got some recognition for and stuff like that. But, where does it all end and what do you do in between and all that kind of thing? So
yeah, the guy that I replaced him in our last position, and he admitted to me that for almost 2 years he wouldn't even walk in the office. He didn't visit very often, but when he did, I noticed he never came into the office. And I was like, dude, is it me?
Yeah.
And I talked to him later. He says, man, no, that wasn't a deal. He said, it took me 2 years to decompress and relax and let go. And then he was able to visit every room in the building then if he wanted to, the ones that weren't behind locked doors. But it takes that. It takes some time to decompress. In your case, it was less decompression from military time,
right?
More decompression from the civilian work. And we go to church with a lot of families, and at least 3 of those ladies are nurses and stuff. And, they thank me for my military career and, this and that. And we have quite a few parties and get-togethers in the Hog House. And I just took him aside one day and I said, you're a trauma nurse in the helicopter. You're like the head on the cancer floor. And I said, you guys have seen so much more than me. It isn't even funny. I mean, in December, we have our neighbors, they do, and she's a respiratory therapist, but we do a stable communion in their barn. Our pastor comes out. We have communion in the cold, the dark, singing and stuff. Then we come to the Hog House for a chili feed. Well, that's only 2 miles away. Well, there was an accident half a mile from here. So guess what? At least I think one of the other nurses hadn't been driving that way, but one was, and sure enough, she's just right down in that ditch, and she's taking care of business. And and she shows up, 45 minutes later at the chili feed and just starts digging in on chili dogs. And it's like, wow, you just did that. And you don't really think that much of it or give you much credit, but they're humble people. A lot of the first responders and the policemen. And I just thought that was pretty amazing.
They do what they do because they want to help people. Mm-hmm. I can give you a funny, we talked about some funny things, and it was serious, but it ended up to be funny. I was working patrol one night. I had a ride along, and we're driving through this neighborhood in Mandan, and we look up, and it's an older house that's been made into like 2 or 3 apartments. And we look in at the house, and in the window, you can see a fire going in there. So I sent my ride along, going, pound on doors, tell everybody, get out. Call in, obviously call in right away, get a fire truck on the way. And of course, being the stupid idiot that I was, I looked in the windows and I saw the fire and there was a lot of smoke. And I thought, if there's somebody in there, I need to get them out. So I get down on my hands and knees and I crawl in and I'm looking around and stuff. And finally the smoke is getting to me a little bit and I'm coughing a little bit and I'm like, got to get out of here. So I get out and I get outside and I'm standing next to a tree and I'm trying to cough up a lung because the smoke. And I wasn't in there very long. I mean, just a matter of maybe a minute or two. And I'm out there and I'm just hacking. I mean, it was kind of gross, but, my ride-along's like, are you okay? Are you okay? Well, then the fire truck guys, I knew a lot of these guys on the fire truck. And the chief came over and he says, Tim, are you okay? And I'm like, Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. And I couldn't look at him because I knew I wasn't fine. And I'm hacking and coughing. He said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine, John. Leave me alone." And he says, "Okay." And he walks away. And his guys go in, and there's a chair on fire in there. We don't even know to this day how it got started. We, guess somebody fell asleep and left a cigarette on it or something. And they get that all taken care of. They ventilate the house, with fans and stuff. And he comes over to me and he says, "Look at me." And I'm like, I looked at him and he said, "Are you okay?" He said, "I'm serious. If you're not okay, I want you to tell me." I said, "No, I'm fine." And by that time, the coughing and hacking is let up a little bit, And I'm trying to think to myself, what's going to happen now? Because he asked me one last time, and he had asked me 4 or 5 times, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you want me to, we'll have an ambulance take you to," and I'm like, No, I'm fine. I'm fine. And he looked at me and he started pounding on my chest with his finger. He said, "You're a blankety blank cop. You are not a fireman." And he's like, just hammering me. And I'm like, "Yes." He said, "If you ever do that again, I'm going to kick your butt so bad." He was just on me and on me. And he didn't let up. He just kept going. And,
oh, man.
Yeah, that was.
He asked you 10 times if you're okay so he can just kick your butt because he wanted to so bad.
Yep.
For risking your own life.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, for really being unsafe. It was a mistake. I should have never went in there.
Yeah.
He looked at me and he said, "Okay, just to let you know, there was nobody in there." So he said, "You put yourself in an unsafe position thinking that you're trying to save someone else's life or get somebody out of there that wasn't in there."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "Okay, I get it. Of course, he calls the chief, so I get chewed out by the chief. And then years later, my daughter Carla and her husband Dustin are shirt-tail relatives of the old fire chief.
Mm-hmm.
We're down in Hankinson, North Dakota. We're at a wedding dance of all places. And he sees me across the hall where the wedding dance is. And he's waving at me, "Tim, come over. Let me buy you a drink, So I go over there, and then he's got like 4 or 5 friends of his standing around. "This is Tim. It's his wife or his daughter and son-in-law are over there." And they all knew them. And he says, "Let me tell you a story about Tim."
Yeah.
And he goes through the whole story. and I'm sitting there and I just have to listen to him. And he tells the whole story, but then he slaps me on the back and he says, "We just wanted you to be okay."
Yeah, because when some people tell stories, they relive the whole thing, but it sounds to me like he was reliving it a little more lightheartedly, even through the chest finger portion of it.
He was on me pretty heavy that day, and I've heard him tell that same story to probably 5 or 6 different people.
Well, you didn't know there was nobody in the house, and when they first show up, they don't know if there's nobody in the house.
But they got all the gear, and they've got all
after the fact. They got it figured out when they checked it out with the proper gear.
Yeah. So, and he was right.
He doesn't want to lose anybody.
No.
Especially
and even
in law enforcement.
Even me,
Yeah. Even you.
He didn't want to lose me either. Well, and we knew each other, like I said, but, it's kind of one of those things. And then you go on to bigger and better things, and you end up with this, that, go from there. So,
grew up in Billings, spent a lot of time living different places in North Dakota, 15 years in the Air Force, moving on, the academy, law enforcement, living in different places in North Dakota, getting reacquainted with old friends, I presume, as you went from town to town. Then you were in the drug portion of it.
That was 12 years.
12 years worth of that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the Bureau of Criminal Investigation that was right after that?
No, that was part
Or
of
that
that.
was all part of that?
We had two divisions. We had a drug division and a criminal division.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of one and the same, but the drug thing, you worked primarily drug cases.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, drugs, criminals, kind of
Yep.
goes together.
no doubt, no doubt. So, but then we went back to Bismarck, and I was just doing regular cases and stuff. And like I said, every once in a while, you come up with a case that kind of stands out and that kind of thing. So, but people see different things on TV or you see it on the news, and you don't think that stuff is going to happen in Bismarck, North Dakota, or South Dakota, or wherever.
Yeah, that's why I was asking that question. Just on the basic drug portion of it, is it just fingered out into all these little towns? I know of little towns down here that I've heard even since I was in college that that town's known as a druggy town and this and that,
Yeah.
and it's just so widespread. It's sad, that it ruins a lot of people's lives and young people's lives and takes a lot of lives. And that's a big thing with the border down south and increasing the drugs that are here that you don't even really know what it's laced with, anymore.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you ever really did, but it's definitely taking a lot more lives, and fentanyl is a big deal. Did you deal with any fentanyl with your...
Fentanyl was just coming in when I left the task force in Wahpeton, but it was starting to be a big deal. And I don't think I was ever involved in any deals, where we actually confiscated or purchased fentanyl and stuff. But I know several guys that have, and it became it's become a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that kills people. People don't realize, some people don't realize that it doesn't take much, and that'll wipe you out. You're done.
Right.
And that kind of thing. And heroin's coming back, and all that kind of thing too. So it's like, boy, you got to really be careful and pay attention to what's going on. And if you're into that kind of thing, that there's even people that I've talked to that were involved in drugs and stuff that say, "Oh, I stay away from that stuff. That stuff will hook you up and send you away in a hurry."
Mm-hmm.
So, like, okay, so you have to make that decision, but there's still people bringing it,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Now, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but do you have opinions on the legalization of marijuana, the medical side and recreational side, or anything you want to speak to on that?
my personal opinion is I think that the medical side can be good,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't believe that it'll always just be the medical side. People, that's what they start with, is getting the medical approved, then they get the recreational approved, and then everybody has it. Is that a positive thing for the general public in our society? No.
Mm-hmm.
I have people, we used to, when I was younger, the big talk about marijuana was the gateway drug. Well, now there's people arguing, and saying, that's not the gateway drug. I said, sure it is. Cigarettes are a gateway drug. Marijuana is a gateway drug.
Mm-hmm.
Cocaine was a gateway drug because it just all advanced from one to the other to the other. You get started with those things, and then almost all of those people. Somebody said, well, it's not the gateway drug. I said, I said, out of all the search warrants I ever did, and I never kept track of how many, but it was a lot. I don't think I remember any search warrant that we did that we got cocaine or meth that didn't have weed with it.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
And they're like, wow, that can't be true. You had to have some case where they had meth or cocaine or something, and they didn't have weed. I'd stand all my partners that work at the crime bureau, and I'll bet you there'd be very few of them that would say that when they went in and they did a cocaine bust or a methamphetamine lab that didn't have weed.
Mm-hmm.
And then they tell me, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm like, well, you can believe what you want to believe, but I'm telling you, I saw it. I didn't see it all. I don't know everything about everything, but I can tell you that in my experience, that's all there.
And you saw it more than once. It's not just like these people
yeah.
that say, "Oh, I saw this," a one-time deal, and then they're professional kind of deal. But yeah, you've got the data. You've got the data behind what you're talking about.
I almost wish, and when you first get into law enforcement, everybody jokes around about, you should keep a journal, of all this stuff. And there is some really funny stuff that happens, and I'll just break and give you just a short. We're on patrol and we get called to a house in an old trailer court, and trailer courts have a bad name. So we get there, and there's 3 or 4 of us that go there. It was a man with a knife call, which is just as serious as a man with a gun.
Yep.
And we get up to the door, pound on the door, and in the old cartoons when the sheriff would knock on the door and they would crack the door open and there'd be like 6 sets of eyes and stuff. Well, this is the way this was when we got there. And so we get there, so then we're just kind of, okay, we hear somebody take off running, so we just kind of force our way in. And the guy in front of me is a good friend of mine now. We talk all the time. But he's going racing down, and we're going into an older small trailer court. He walks through the living room and hits the linoleum floor in the kitchen, and his feet slip out from under him. Well, when we just walked in, it was a light powdery snow.
Oh, geez.
And it stuck to his boots.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going. So I'm like, he's a big guy. I'm like, I'm trying to get out of the way. And he jumps up and we go chase this guy down the hallway. We get the guy. The guy comes out. And that's not the funniest part. The funniest part is that when he fell on his tail and he slid up and his feet smacked the door on the refrigerator. So he had 2 perfect footprints on the refrigerator.
Nice.
Yeah. And the next funniest part is we got called to there about 3 or 4 days later, and it was all the same guys that went there. Those footprints were still on the refrigerator. So I was like I said, Bill, I said, next time bring some cleaning supplies so we can clean your prints off the refrigerator,
Oh.
But, it's just things like that too. Or locking your keys in the squad car,
Yeah.
I had that happen a couple times. And then I had the keys locked in my car, and my wife locked the keys in our car at a gas station the same day. She's calling me up and she's saying, I locked the keys in my car. And she's at the gas station up in North Bismarck, and I'm at work in Mandan. And I started laughing because here I had locked my keys in the squad car, and that's the most embarrassing thing in the world, other than getting it stuck in the mud or something. That's funny too.
A lot of razzing at the precinct.
Oh, yeah. And then you try to do it on the phone. You call somebody to go get you a set of keys. Then they get on the radio and said, yeah, I'm heading over to, my number at that time was 39.
Ratting you out.
Yeah, ratting you out and telling everybody that's listening that he locked his keys in his car.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah, you can double that one.
I thought you were going to say that her keys are locked in the car. She's calling you, and you can't go because your keys are locked in the car at the same time.
Just about.
Was
just
it?
About. So it was like, okay.
So earlier today, and I didn't even ask you ahead of time, there's a pretty high-profile case that you were involved with. I didn't know if you were okay with talking about that on here, or it's totally your choice.
Well, and I really would. It's a case that I'm very proud of, not necessarily for what the work that I did in it, but the outcome of how it ended up. And we actually were asked to do a TV spot on that particular case because the guy was I don't know how do you call him. He was a psychotic guy, and I personally believe that he has killed a lot of people. And again, it gets back to what we were talking about. Some people don't believe this stuff happens in North Dakota and South Dakota and
Right.
and that kind of thing. But this particular case was a guy named John Clark Bridges, and we got in a call. I was actually way out of town. I was probably a half an hour from Bismarck, and I got a call from my boss and said, "Hey, we've got this individual that had an accident, or he crashed his vehicle on the interstate, and in the back there's a guy that's blood all over, and this guy's dead, and we're not sure." He's saying that it was caused from the accident, but we don't really believe him, and all that kind of stuff. And it was a year and 1 day after the police sergeant was killed that I worked on that case
Right.
the year before. And he said, "Look, I just want you to go to the hospital, meet the trooper there," because the highway patrol had responded there. And we just don't believe this guy's story, and they had some pictures of the injuries to this guy, and they sent them to me. And so I was hurrying to get down there. And so I get there, and they show me these pictures of this guy. Well, literally, Jim, I don't know how much, you've probably been seeing things of people dead or whatever, but this guy, his neck was literally laid open in the back. And it wasn't like he scraped or a piece of glass from the windshield cut him. I mean, it was deep, literally very deep.
Mm-hmm.
And inside this van, there was blood everywhere. And so I'm like, okay. And then the prosecutor comes on the phone, and he said, "Tim, would you work this case with me? We worked on the case the year before. He knew me, I knew him. So we, and I said, "Hey, I'll work with you." But I said, my boss has to tell me who, and my boss was sitting in the room with him and said, "Oh yeah, you're on it." So I'm like, okay. But so I get there, we interview this guy. He makes up a bogus story about that the truck was damaged, and the wheels, the steering wheel was shaking like this, and then I ran into a abutment, bridge abutment, and stuff, and we're okay. But I basically was on the outside looking in. The trooper was doing the investigation because it was his jurisdiction
Mm-hmm.
for the accident. So we let this guy go through and tell his story. And we're getting to the point where the doctor comes in, or he pulls me out of the examination room, and he says, we're going to have to let this guy go because he's not injured bad enough for us to admit him to the hospital. Well, about that same time, they had showed me the pictures from the accident and stuff. And I called the prosecutor and I said, "Look, dude," I said, "they're going to let him go. So you got to give me some way that I can at least keep this guy for a little while anyway." And he said, well, he had some way to do it. So he told me about it. Yep, that's fine. So we took him into custody. We took him over to the county jail, which was right across the street from the hospital, by the way. And I go in, and the trooper again, and he gives us the exact same story. And he doesn't invoke his Miranda. He said he'll talk to us, whatever. So when I talked to the prosecutor, he said, "Okay, well, let's just do this. We'll tell him, we're going to because of the type of injuries and everything, we're going to hang on to you until we can figure out what happened here." So we put him in, and that was probably took him into custody around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So we work a part of the night and into the next morning. And again, that's where I talk about having help from other agents and stuff. And two guys that are good friends of mine that started processing the vehicle that was involved in the crash. And I got a chance to look at the pictures more and the pictures of the injuries to the guy that was killed, and excuse me, and all of the things there. Well, then, one of the good things nowadays is there's cameras in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the trooper's car, he had a camera. So when he activated his lights, he pulled up to the accident, and he's taking video. Well, I get a call from a good friend of mine who's the lieutenant for that trooper, and he said, "Tim, you got to come to my office." And I'm like, "What do you?" He said, "I got the video off the car." I said, "Is it good?" He said, "Yeah, it's good." So I zip up to his place, go into his office, and we watch this guy. Now, I'll give you a little bit more background about how this occurred, or how it was discovered, I should say. The trooper who got on the scene was coming from the other direction, going to Bismarck. He sees the accident. There's a lot of vehicles that pull over to give assistance. We're in North Dakota nice, South Dakota nice, whatever.
Yep.
And so he turns around, he comes up. So this is video from his car. Shows him get up. There's a van that hit those, the big sand buckets that are next to the bridges. He hits a couple of those. The trooper goes around to the passenger side, opens the door, gets up on his knees up in the top of the seat, looks over. He realizes, holy crap, there's blood everywhere and there's a dead guy in here. So while he's doing that, the driver is going around the back, opens up the back doors, and he's taking some things out of the van, throwing them over in the sand, and he's taking his feet trying to cover him up.
Oh,
well, what it was zip ties. He had kidnapped this guy and tied him up with zip ties, and he knew as soon as the cops get there, this is not going to be pretty if they look in the back and this guy's got zip ties. So he cut all the zip ties before the cops got there and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we had. That was Saturday. So this happened Friday late afternoon. Saturday was when we found the video. And also in the video, the trooper had him come and stand at the front of the squad car. And there's a pretty good distance between the crashed vehicle and the squad car. And he's leaning, he's sitting on the hood of the car. The trooper goes back up with a medi bag, but the guy was already dead. He was doing what little bit he could.
Right.
And while he's sitting, leaning against the front of the squad car, you can see him turn his head and he looks that way, and he turns his head and looks that way to see if anybody's coming up behind him. And he reaches in his coat and comes out and he throws something underneath the car. We didn't see that till the next day.
Mm-hmm.
But here he had bought a knife, and that's what he had used, an axe and the knife to kill this guy. Well, I actually interviewed this guy 4 times. Every time that I interviewed him, I offered him the Miranda warning. He signed off on it, never asked for an attorney. And he told me the third time when I talked to him, I said, "John," I said, we got to talk about this because this isn't going to work. And I said, "We've got some video from the squad car." And then he says to me, "Okay, I'll tell you everything you want to know." He said, I want the death penalty. He wants the death penalty. Well, we don't have the death penalty in North Dakota. But I just told him, I said, "Well, I don't have any control over that, but I'll tell the prosecutor what." And I'm trying to think if I left out something here. He we sat down and he goes through everything that happened. He literally stands up and acts out what he did to kill this guy. And he tells us the whole story. The whole story goes on. It's a long story.
How many of you are in the room when he's telling this story?
When he admitted, it was just me.
Okay.
But there was a couple deputies outside the interview room. And, but he goes through this whole scenario of how he met this guy. They were working for pay for the day. We have a company there that will hire people and they get paid at the end of the day.
Yep.
So they get money. And he knew this guy. They had beers together. They had done, he talked about steroids. We were never able to verify all that. But he does all this stuff. And then he says, well, I drove to Fargo and I had a dream that this guy was videotaping me and going to tell the police that we were doing this steroid thing and he was going to inject him with engine oil and all this kind of stuff. So he was afraid that this guy was going to do that. He drives from Fargo back to Bismarck, goes to the Walmart up in North Bismarck, buys the knife that we had. He was the only one who bought a knife like that in that time frame. We could see him walk in and out. We go through this whole thing, and then the zip ties. He went to Menards. It's right down the street from there. We got him video. We got the receipts. All that stuff was in the van.
Mm-hmm.
Then he just tells me this whole story about the dream and all that kind of stuff. And then he says, this is what I did. And if we watch the Injustice with Nancy Grace, when you watch that, you'll see him actually standing up and acting out what he did. And in our training, they tell you, sometimes a guy will show you exactly what he did. This guy did that.
Yeah. So just so you know, he was on a national show.
Right.
Right. So what was the name and title and all that?
It was called Injustice with Nancy Grace. And she has her own series. And I want to say it was on the Oxygen Network. And I had gotten a call about doing something with this case. And her motif for doing these was because she believed that it was an injustice that this guy's criminal history allowed him to still be out, and he was doing this, and that a judge from when he was younger, when he had committed a different murder, that he should not have been out and stuff. And so that was her reasoning for having this.
Because you said he was a minor on that first offense. So
he was. It was in Illinois. He was from Illinois. But when we started hearing more things about him and all this stuff, it was just amazing. I mean, we didn't know it at the time, but he was a murderer, and he admitted this murder. He admitted that he was going to kill another guy from Bismarck, but he couldn't find him to take him. He was going to take the guy that he killed, take him outside of town, find a place and bury him.
Wow.
And then he also admitted that he had killed a couple people in Washington State, a couple people in Oregon, and then one on the Utah-Wyoming line. But we couldn't verify a lot of them, but we did verify one where he was actually in Oregon, and they had contact with him. He had a contact with an off-duty police officer, and the vehicle that he had was similar to what we knew about and all this stuff. And he admitted that he tied this guy up with chains and big weights, weightlifting weights, threw him off a cliff. Well, they said, we found this body. It was beaten to smithereens. They did a sketch, they had a sketch artist do a sketch on this guy and all that kind of stuff. So after he had already confessed to me, I went back at him the fourth time. Again, he doesn't invoke Miranda, and he starts talking to me, and I just said, hey, let's get this all out of the way. You got all these other people and that you talked about with me, and then he said, or I asked him, I said, we want to help the families of these other people. And he said, doesn't matter. They're all homeless people. Nobody cares about them.
Oh, man. Oh.
So here we are. We know he killed the one kid in Illinois. He killed the guy in Bismarck. He was going to kill another guy in Bismarck. He admits to 2 homicides in Washington State, 2 in Oregon, and 1 on the Wyoming state line. So what does that all add up to? What, 8 or 9?
Yeah.
Well, we had his case file sent to the profilers in Washington, D.C. at the FBI office there, and they called us back, and he had been interviewed by a psychologist before he pled guilty to the initial murder. And in that report, the psychologist said he's the most psychotic person he's ever interviewed.
Wow.
In writing, in the report.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going like, okay, so how's this all going to work? And so then, we talked about all of those things and putting 2 and 2 together. And, it turned out that, he was possibly homosexual. We never proved that or anything, but it's possible that, and he had chased his mom around with a knife when he was a kid. I actually talked to the sheriff that was involved in the case where he killed the kid in Illinois and stuff. And it just went on and on and on. It just piled up and piled up and piled up. It was amazing. So then, I haven't told you every detail about that, but if I was to walk up to the common guy and say, this is what all happened, and go through the whole story, which would take us about 3 days, and say, what do you think about this guy? Do you think he killed any other people? I would say, generally speaking, most people would say, oh, yeah, he probably killed a lot more people.
Wow.
So, but, that was probably one of the most in-depth cases that I worked on as far as getting some attention from it and those kind of things. And Injustice with Nancy Grace, she, like I said, her motif, her reason for doing that was because she believes that the judge who let him with the light sentence that he was given after he killed the young guy
as a teenager, that if he had really put him away for the rest of his life, all these other people would not have died. Yeah.
So
that's a tough call in minors and, after the fact, hindsight kind of thing. But
right.
You definitely understand what she's getting at because it's pretty serious. And you were on that show.
Yeah. Yeah. It's episode or season 10, I got this wrong. Season 2, episode 10. And I think the title of it is A Taste of Blood or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's about John Clark Bridges, who right now, I can even add a little bit more to this. After he was pled guilty to the homicide there, and we learned all these other things about him, he was at the North Dakota State Pen there in Bismarck. And he had been in there for a month or 2, I suppose. And I went to work one morning, and the gal whose office was next to me, she said, hey, Tim, did you hear about Bridges? And I'm like, no. And here he had made a shank in his cell, mm-hmm. and a young corrections officer had gone in there to check on him and stuff, and he stabbed the corrections officer. So I was like, and you're angry at him because he did this, but I feel so bad for the corrections officer. I helped put him away, which he deserved to be put away. But you feel so bad because, okay, now I had him in there, and here he stabs this corrections officer.
Yeah.
Well, I had actually asked for him to be put into a federal penitentiary. No, he's not that bad. He's not that bad.
Not that bad.
Well, after
What's it take?
Yeah. After he had, assaulted the corrections officer, it was less than a month, and they took him to the Supermax in outside of Denver.
Wow.
And he's still
today.
there. He's there today.
Okay.
So, but
Yeah, and like I said, we talked about this a little bit earlier today, but I didn't outright ask you if you wanted to speak about it, during this.
yeah.
So sorry I kind of put you on the spot with
No,
that.
that's
but,
fine. And
it's a very
I like
interesting
talking
story.
about it. I like talking about it. It's you don't always get a chance to talk about some of your experiences in the cases. But again, it all goes back to I had a few, but there were several other guys, agents, and I'm sure you have some in South Dakota too, for your state agency. They all have many, many, many more than I ever experienced. So I always commend them, and I give appreciation for all these guys that are out there doing those jobs and the ones who have helped me far and near. California, when I was doing the drug case we were talking about, there was guys, officers in Sacramento, California, who were calling me on the phone. We're sharing information and all that kind of stuff. So it's not just Tim Myers and a few guys in North Dakota. It's the guys in the Oregon State Police who shared their information with us and all that kind of thing. And it's amazing. It is totally amazing how it all works. And it can work as long as everybody is helping each other and does their part.
It can be pretty gratifying work.
Yeah.
So did you have much trouble? Well, number one, waking up in the middle of the night and can't shut your brain off. Number two, going from this case to the next case. And did you have times where you had like 6 cases at once, or what was that like?
Well, you always had a number of cases, but some cases demand your attention, while other cases are kind of slower acting cases. They're not moving as quickly as maybe something like that. So you have to prioritize. I mean, if you had 6 or 8 cases on the books, you had to make sure that you were working the priority case first and then the next priority case and the next priority case. Have I ever had nights where I couldn't shut it off? Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I did not enjoy about working when I moved back to Bismarck, when you're in Bismarck, that's the main office, and you have all the other agents that are out in the state. Well, for instance, guy in Grafton, our Grafton agent, called me up and said, "Hey, can you go to an autopsy for me?" The ME's office is in Bismarck. He's in Grafton, which is way in the northeast corner. And I'm like, sure. He gives me all the circumstances for the unattended death. And then I go to the autopsy. Well, I had probably been to my early career when I was at Man MPD. I was probably at 2. The one where the native girl was stabbed to death, that's 3. And then when I went back to Bismarck, I attended so many, it was like you just got tired of it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And I hated it. We had one in Minot where there was 4 people killed. I went to every one of those autopsies. 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, the next day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. But it's part of the job. You have to do it, and you don't necessarily have to like it, but it's part of the job and you have to do it. Somebody has to do it. So that's just the way that the chips fall, so to speak, on some of that stuff. But I didn't enjoy that. I didn't enjoy that at all. Somebody's murdered and you're trying to figure out what happened, or, somebody drowns and, they find the body. So you got to go and I mean, you just get that kind of stuff would wear on you.
Yeah, you probably see some of those visions at night.
Well, you don't necessarily see the visions, but and you're, like you said, it's like, geez, I wonder how this happened. I wonder how this happened. And you're talking with the other investigators and that kind of thing, Sometimes you end up going to autopsies for professional people, bands and stuff. Have you ever heard of the band Gwar? GWAR.
Uh-uh.
One of their band members died in their van as they were leaving the U.S. going into Canada. He died on the bus, and I got to go and attend his autopsy.
Mm.
Smoot was his name.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember his first name. But they wore the big masks and stuff when they were a headbanger type group. Look that up on your phone sometime.
Yeah. No wonder I don't know. I liked I ran a disc jockey unit for 20 years. I liked a lot of kind of music and stuff. So it's not just a cowboy hat thing.
I'm here to tell you that.
Yeah, I hadn't seen them.
I was here to tell you when he told me, yeah, this guy's a member of GWAR. And I'm like, what? I'm like, I have no idea what GWAR is. And he goes, it's a headbanging. So I looked it up and I'm like, holy crap. And people paid money to go see these people.
Yeah. You said they wore masks and stuff?
Yeah, big masks and
Really?
stuff. When you look at it, you'll be going like, oh my goodness.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you retired sooner than what I thought you had, as far as, what'd you say, 2014?
Right. The end of September in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have some decompression time? I can't talk tonight. Decompression time with that, or was it a fairly, did you have maybe not quite so gruesome a case as your last couple of years and you're able to kind of slide out, or was it pretty rough?
No, it was pretty easy. It was more of the realization that you didn't have to go to those anymore. But on the same token, I don't know if you remember the case in Mandan where a guy killed 3 or 4 people at the RJR company up there, and they were a property management company or whatever, and this guy kills 3 or 4 people or 5, I don't even remember. But you're hearing it on the news, and you're working a different job, and you know that if you were still working for BCI, you would be there.
Right.
That bothered me, not bothered me in a bad way, but you still felt that need to go out and be a part of that and help those other people, all those other agents.
Right.
That
Because
was
you've got a lot of experience, and the experience walks out the door each time a person retires.
exactly.
You got to trust that the younger ones are getting that experience that you got younger, but maybe it's kind of hard to let go of that.
Well, and it is, because really when that was all going on, I could just I was happy I didn't have to deal with it, but on the other side, you want to be a part of it. You wanted to help answer all the questions and get the guy who did it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't get to do that, but I was lucky enough to know some of the guys who were working on it, so I had a little inside track once in a while.
Yeah.
They didn't tell me all the
over here.
They didn't tell me all the details.
At least you
but
can talk a little lightheartedly about things. Still feel a part of it, in your own way. So,
yeah.
how long after you retired did you buy your first RV? Because you got a big one out here right now.
Well, you knew the story. We bought a 2003 Honda Goldwing, and then we bought a trailer to pull behind it that was a tent camper.
I remember that with the reunion in Canada, where we have a bunch of them, but
Yeah.
one of the later ones, and that thing folded out.
Yeah.
People were just watching
Yeah.
because it created this castle that was hooked to your motorcycle.
Yeah, and we had it stuffed full of everything. Every little hole there was a pair of shoes or something stuffed in it. you
Yeah.
know?
Did you ever take pictures of that?
I think we do have some pictures of it all set up and stuff.
Uh-huh.
But I used to take pictures when I packed it so that I knew that when I packed it the next time, I put everything in the same place,
Right.
And then
Yeah.
it was shortly after that, or I suppose, I had a stent put in 2018. Yeah, I think it was 2018.
Yeah, 5 years ago.
Yeah, and that's when we decided that, pulling the camper thing that's not fun anymore. So we sold that camper. We kept the bike, And then we went ahead and bought our first motorhome or Class A motorhome. We had a 24-footer, and we remodeled it. It was an older one, but it was in really good shape. And we remodeled some of the inside and stuff. And then when we got close to retirement, then we decided, we need a little bit bigger one if we're going to, do the work camper thing or the retirement thing, just traveling. So we said, okay, let's get a little bigger one. So we sold the one that we had, and now we got the one sitting in your yard outside.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
I'll tell you, it's older, but like I said, we feel good about what we've done with it, and
Yeah, it didn't cost you a fortune, and you got the talent to fix things up, and you had already fixed up the 24-footer some.
you had some experience in how
yeah.
things work. And,
Yeah. Yeah, it looks really nice.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your help today. You helped me with a couple of projects on there
no
that
problem.
needed
Simple
some extra
things.
hands. Yeah, but it's always good to have those extra hands and
Yeah,
stuff.
it's fun to work together.
Yeah, and we talked about this at the beginning, is family and friends and coworkers and stuff. You gotta love them. You gotta appreciate them, and you need to tell them. They don't know if you don't tell them.
Right.
And we talked about this. Last year we had our family reunion in Rapid City and stuff, and there was some animosities and I don't know what you call it, but people fighting a little bit, inner family fighting and
Just
stuff.
a little.
But then it's nice to just stand up there and say, hey, I love you all, literally, because you're my family. And we don't need to have all that negative stuff and all those things. And literally, your family and my family were probably the closest of all of our aunts and uncles and that kind of stuff, because we were a little bit closer location and things like that. But, I wish that we would have lived where we were close enough to be part of everybody that was our family.
Because what the deal is, this is on my mom's side. My mom and his dad were siblings and hailed from Wisconsin. Well, our grandfather, who was the pinnacle of the family, everybody agrees on that, Dale Myers, we've got a memorial to him out in the hog house out here. And he got separated from his family when he was way young. So, a long story short, one of his sibling brothers ended up in Alberta and raised about almost just as big of a family as Grandpa Dale did on this side. And if I remember right, it was like our grandparents' 50th anniversary. The brothers had found each other. I don't know if it was a little while before that, but that's the first time I remember that we had Canadians and Americans together, the Myers clan.
Yeah.
And that was pretty special. So then every 3 years after that, ever since then, we've done these reunions in the U.S. and in Canada.
And there was Uncle Ben he's the Canadian brother of Grandpa, and his daughter, my dad, and some others, they all worked together to get all of the I don't say the older generation together for the first time. And, there's a lot of pictures of that and stuff. And that kind of started this whole thing. And then, like you said, at Grandpa and Grandma's 50th anniversary, we just kind of, everybody showed up for then. And then we just kind of decided, hey, let's do this more often. We don't need to be away from each other. And it all comes back to that same line that we used earlier. Life is too short. Every time that we have a reunion, it isn't very long and we lose one. Well, we lost a couple already since last year, and young and old. And when it all comes down to it, you just have to realize how important life is, how important family is, how important friends are. So you just got to keep telling people you love them, show them you love them, and just hang in there. And tell them to hang in there too, because sometimes everybody's fighting their old battles,
Right.
But,
well, and my wife Mary today, she came from a big family, and she's lost a brother and parents and people are scattering a little bit. But she gave you guys the compliment, as in us, our family, that when something happens, good, better, and different, people show up. People show up. And our family is big enough where it's not the whole family, but there's always going to be somebody that shows up. So, and that's part of the reason why, and I've said before on other podcasts, why I started doing this was just to preserve people's stories. And if they do this, but they don't want it on YouTube or Spotify or whatever, then just give them a digital copy. It's for their family. So you've just recorded something tonight that your family is going to be able to hear, and I didn't give you a heads up on this question. So
Okay.
we've got the stack of cases that this middle camera is on. And I'll just pick a number. You've got 4 great-great-great-grandkids sitting there. What would you want to say to them when maybe someday they see this video? What would you want to say to your progeny?
I would want them to know how much I loved my family and my kids and my grandkids and stuff, and I would want them to always love with all your heart and love your family, love your parents, love your brothers and sisters, love your cousins, your aunts and uncles, and your grandparents and stuff, because life is short. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yep. Meet eyes with them. Tell them.
Yep. And I just tell them, say, love each other, love. There's so much hate and discontent in the world. And when you're talking about family and friends, those are the people that you need to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
Always, forever. I've made my mistakes throughout my life, and that's one that at times you look at yourself and you say, dang it, I should have never done that. I should have never said that. But now, if you want to have my advice for your life, love them all. If they're part of your life, love them all.
Mm-hmm.
What's the old adage, blood's thicker than water? Well, sometimes friendship is more of a brotherhood than even some of your family.
Mm-hmm.
So don't forget about your friends. Love your family, love your friends. People that need help, help them. We talked about this earlier, is we always, when we first got married, people helped us.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a lot of money. We were young in the military people. We didn't have a lot. So when somebody offered us a free high chair because they knew we were expecting a baby, we were grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
Pay it forward. Do all those things, but love from inside. Love from your heart.
Yeah, because people look at us at these ages and we're retired, and it's like, oh, you've made it, you've got plenty, blah, blah, blah. Took a long time to get to that point, but just never forget what it felt like to be desperate. So we were talking earlier today about just always being on the lookout for somebody in need. Sometimes it's drastic need. Sometimes it's just a little need, but just help people out. And it really, and you don't just do it so you feel good. You do it to help people.
Yeah. And I appreciate you asking me to do this. When you first mentioned it, I thought, I don't know if I should do that.
It was at the reunion, wasn't it, when I mentioned it? Or was it another event? Maybe it wasn't long ago.
I think it could have been.
In Rapid.
Yeah. But, we talked about it and stuff, and I was like, at first I was thinking like, I don't know. But then I'm like, it's nice to be able to share with people that you care about and share your life experiences. There's a lot of people that are relatives or friends that they don't know any of the things that we talked about today.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it was as long ago as a reunion. I don't think this was a thought at that time, but we were together somewhere.
I think it was at Missy's funeral.
I think you're right.
I think we talked about it then.
Yeah. Well, whatever the case, I was glad you said yes, and I've got a quite extensive list of people. I haven't talked to everybody, of course, but with the surprise I got yesterday of, hey, Tim and Dylan are here, come for supper. Supper's at 6. Well, it was 10 to 5, and Mary and I are like, we're going to go.
Well,
we're
I
going to
appreciate
show
that.
up.
And like you said, yesterday working out like it was, if we'd have tried to plan it, it would have never worked like that. It just happened that everybody was near enough that we could all get together. So, and we appreciate you guys inviting us to your home and sharing this time and talking and putting together your, what is it? The Hog
The
House
Hog House Chronicles.
Chronicles.
That's the first name we thought of, and then I opened up a Word document. And I was talking to Mary. I was like, is there something else? So I pulled up the thesaurus, and I typed up Chronicles. Have a whole list. We went through this, and we're like, just use Chronicles.
Chronicles
It's the only
okay.
thing that sounded decent. So
Yeah, no, it's good.
I filmed practice podcasts in the Hog House, 5 of them that are not public on YouTube, but we're getting toward the colder time of the year. Hog House isn't a good place to be really in the summer with flies and such. It's a outdoor cowboy bar, not outdoor, but it's a outbuilding. And so what I say is when it starts getting cold, that's when my social season starts. Of course, you got hunting season, and you got to let guys get through that. But the social time's out there. Spend a lot of time in the Hog House, so we will have some podcasts and show you guys parts of the Hog House in the future. So
Awesome.
but anyway, thanks a lot, Tim. Really appreciate
Thank you, buddy.
it.
I love you, bud.
Love you too, man.
All right.
And we'll get together again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks,
All right.
Jim.
Take care.
Yep, you too.
All right. I'll go ahead and get a start. Hello, this is Jimbo from the... Yeah, I think I'll try that again. I got stuck on YouTube. I didn't even do that on purpose to loosen you up.
Oh, my gosh.
What'd you think of that?
I never thought in a million years we could just talk about shit for 2.5 hours.
Oh, did you see the time?
Yeah, while
Oh,
I was
I shut it
watching
off.
it, I
Yeah.
thought you were going to try and wind down and stuff, and then we just kept going. I'm like, holy crap. Nope, that's all.
Did you have fun?
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, pretty cool. But
Are you hungry?
you betcha. Shit, it's almost 8 o'clock, Jim. Oh my God.